Hello.
Hello, good to see you.
And hello to you. Welcome to Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben.
I'm Jake.
I'm Reuben.
And this is your weekly roundup of all the films and re-releases hitting screens this week. First, we travel back in time to 1975 to the infamous first night of Saturday Night Live. Jason Reitman directs Saturday Night.
And Mike Leigh has a new film out, Hard Truths, which answers the age-old question, what is a baby going to put in its pockets?
Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid star in Companion, a mix between Terminator, Ex Machina, and Columbo.
And finally, we're going to be revisiting the masterpiece that is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon for its anniversary re-release. And of course, please make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, as we'd hate for you to miss any of the Cinema Spotlight episodes. And of course, we're available on Spotify now as well, so do make sure you're following us over there. Like, subscribe, comment, tell us everything that we got wrong. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
This week, we had the opportunity to sit down with Ernest Nabialek, and he talks about his amazing new documentary, SE8. Check it out.
So my name's Ernest, and so the film is called SE8. It's a documentary about Deptford Flea Market and kind of the different stuff that's affecting it. When I started it, I honestly had no idea about the death of market culture or anything about that, to be honest. But I was definitely interested in the community aspect of that place, and that place being somewhere I was attached to in that I lived there, basically, was kind of interesting to me. I think a lot of my favorite films are surreal documentaries in a way, and maybe that can kind of be seen in that documentary, that these are maybe my influences.
And you can watch Ernest's documentary and his film Clean Your Room in the description below.
Now, first up, we're going to be talking about Saturday Night, which talks about the infamous first night of SNL. It's directed by Jason Reitman, who you'll know from Juno and Ghostbusters Afterlife, and it has a star-studded cast, including Gabriel LaBelle, Rachel Sennett, J.K. Simmons, and many, many more. Special shout-out to Cooper Hoffman, I have to say. I thought he was outstanding in this. But first of all, Jake, tell me everything you have to say about this film, all your thoughts, because I think it's a really interesting one to delve into.
Well, I think from our side of the pond, SNL's this strange, we get clips on YouTube. It's a very strange thing because it's not a common thing on our television. I wouldn't know where to watch it.
Yeah.
However, I was fully engaged in the film. And Jason Reitman, I must say, I hated the last two Ghostbusters films. I thought they lacked humor, both of them. And I think, well, Ghostbusters, it's a schlubby workplace comedy, it just happens to have ghosts. However, this was stacked to the walls with humor and energy. It was amazing. It was absolutely incredible. I was so engaged. It had that Birdman kineticism. I think that's a film that can be closely related to, it's in a theater. It's a very stressful job. It's to do with unruly actors as well.
Yeah.
I thought every sort of cast member was exceptional. I must say the casting of this film is probably the highlight. Everyone who plays the part they're supposed to play, they melted into the character. Dylan O'Brien, who I didn't notice was Dylan O'Brien, playing Dan Aykroyd was my absolute standout. He has the voice down. Some people say he doesn't look like it, but from the big screen, I'm like, yes, he very much does to me. And also, he's just talking about aliens and UFOs throughout the film, and I'm like, that is so accurate and hilarious. Yeah. And then the Riddler, Corey Michael Smith, playing Chevy Chase it's spot on. Like, you sense that because we've obviously had the years later, sort of the aftermath of all these mega stars. Yes. All of them became mega stars who were coke-filled nightmares, basically, especially Chevy Chase. But we see the beginnings of that character. It's not really a caricature. You can actually see each of these characters, where they're going to go, where they're going to be. I thought Gabriel LaBelle is the star of the film. We follow him throughout. I don't know Lorne Michaels' character very well as a person. I know he's a very powerful, very creative man, but I really thought that it really sold it. I really love Rachel Sennett in anything she does. She's fabulous and was fabulous in this film. Willem Dafoe has a small part. J.K. Simmons has small parts, but they arise to it. I really also think that John Baptiste as Billy Preston was amazing. And his score for the film is so accurate to the 70s music of the time, and also the music you hear on Saturday Night Live. I thought the direction was very creative, interesting. I forgot to mention Nicholas Braun is incredible in this film.
Yeah.
He shows up twice, ladies and gentlemen, in parts both as...
Which I didn't realise.
Neither did our producer. I was talking to Matthew, our producer, about it, and he was shocked to hear that Nicholas Braun was both playing Jim Henson and Andy Kaufman. And I thought, amazing performances that people couldn't tell,
Yeah.
I thought it was littered with jokes, littered with heart. It has a beautiful moment with John Belushi and Gilda Radner, people who sadly died way before their time. It really respects that. And I thought, even though it's very subtle, it's beautifully done. I think as an ensemble comedy with a central theme of going through Lorne Michaels' creative process, I just absolutely adored it. I was having such a great time, and I would watch it again in a heartbeat. It's one of those films you just get, it's like a roller coaster.
I agree.
You go back for more.
Yeah.
And so, I've talked mostly about the cast because I really think that's the standout. I really do. What about you, Reuben?
Yeah, so I think the word that I would use to describe it is propulsive. As you say, it has such energy, and a lot of that is because of the music, which I really think is exceptional. But also, it's to do with the fact that we get a lot of these big, long takes where we're just tracking through rooms, the camera's spinning, we've got loads going on, we're looking at all of these different cast members, we're looking at, the lighting technicians panicking because, something's broken. All of this stuff is happening at the same time, and the camera takes it all in and sweeps us along with it. And it creates, I think a roller coaster is a really good kind of comparison. It creates this sense of momentum, which the film, amazingly, I think, manages to sustain for the entire runtime. And it opens with a quote that says, the show doesn't go on because it's finished, it goes on because it's 11:30. And I think that it captures, therefore, that spirit of, okay, well, everything is an absolute nightmare, but we've just got to roll with it and do our best and stick it on. And I mean, the main kind of tension in this, therefore, is they're just constantly fighting the clock. Regularly get little updates where a minute will suddenly tick by and everyone's panicking again. It has a really strong sense of the madness that you can get in creative projects when everything in the world that can go wrong absolutely is going on. So yeah, I was really, really impressed, and I was similarly surprised by the performances, which I sort of thought, as there are so many big stars in this, we could easily lose connection with them. That was my kind of fear coming into this, was they'd all be caricatures, really. And I didn't feel that. I actually particularly kind of, there's a kind of central relationship between the Gabriel Labelle and the Rachel Sennett character, which I thought was really nicely drawn and gives us enough to really be hooked in emotionally too. So no, I was really impressed with this. I think it's definitely a crowd pleaser of a film. I don't know if you saw it in a busy screen, but my cinema was pretty packed and everyone was having a good time.
You're right. I think fear of getting lost was something that I thought, maybe because SNL seems like this unruly. You've got like 20 cast members, and you've got to each give them their dues because all these people are famous icons in their own right. The original cast of SNL. And yet I really thought they all got their place to say. I also think that the cinematography was expert, not only in the movement of the camera, but sort of the decision to film it the way they did it with this gross film grain, and it looks very warm, and it feels like we're in the 1970s. It looks dirty, it looks grungy, it looks like cheap film stock, but obviously it's not very cheap because it still looks brilliant.
Oh, it does. It looks fantastic. Not least, I think, as well, because everybody is smoking, so every single room is just full of haze.
Absolutely, but I also think that it captures that essence of the 70s and that era much better than A Complete Unknown does, which sort of has this great gloss, but sort of glosses over all the sort of grime of Bob Dylan, whereas we barely see any drug use in that film. Whereas in this film, it's to the forefront. Everyone's smoking weed, everyone's drinking, everyone's doing cocaine. And we know that's true. That's part of the DNA of this crazy, crazy sketch comedy show. And I think it really comes across. And I think this idea of the counterculture, this big Hollywood movie might not represent that very well, you might think, but it does. It captures some of that kinetic energy. It captures that idea that, they're all in it together. Yeah, no, I'd highly recommend this film just because it is fun, and it's not too heavy, but there are moments where you can just really connect with these beautiful little moments, and highly recommended from me.
And did you find that the SNL stuff worked? Because, as you kind of alluded to at the start, SNL isn't really something that we have in the UK. And I have to say, I tend to think it's not particularly funny when I do watch clips. I think the hit rate of SNL is sort of 1 in 50 sketches are good. But that's because, they're constantly kind of experimenting and trying new stuff. Did you find that actually, the sketches that we saw worked? Because I think when we actually get glimpses of the show that they're putting on, I did sort of think, wow, this was a hit, because I didn't think they were very funny. But maybe that's just, humor has kind of changed over the decades. And I do think that there is also a bit of a fundamental difference between American humor and British humor. Like, I don't think SNL to this day tends to be necessarily that sort of British friendly. What did you think?
I think that's a really good question, actually, because those were the slight moments in the film where I was like, really? But it was accurate.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I can't fault it for its accuracy. But for me, it was more the presentation of how the humor was crafted by the performers and the writers.
Yeah.
And that sort of back and forth and that presentation, I can really see why people would find performance of that comedy kinetic or interesting. The idea of Dan Aykroyd's sort of blunt dryness that you really see in films like Ghostbusters or Blues Brothers, but with also that larger than life character. Chevy Chase's dryness and how he sort of in the film he takes a role that then becomes very famous in the real life. He sort of becomes the Weekend Update guy. It's historical fact. It's sadly not a spoiler, but yeah, and really owns the scene just because of the way it's presented. Even if the jokes really aren't that funny, it's just that it's funny when someone does it. It's
100%.
like Mr. Bean almost. It's funny when someone does it. And I think that worked well for me because I was so locked into the characters. Yes, SNL, who knows if it's ever been funny, but it's always, well, I think especially back then, it was always trying something. It was always, you want to see talented people do stuff no matter what, because it's just interesting to see how they take it, even if the words necessarily don't ring with a British sense of humor, which I think is more nuanced and well, more my cup of tea, but I'm very British.
I agree. And a bit meaner. I think British humor is quite cruel.
Very cruel. I think British is a pessimistic humor, whereas I think American humor is far more optimistic. I think you can tell we have more rain. But yeah, so I don't think it really worked, but that didn't bother me because I've never thought SNL actually worked for me anyway. So it was perfectly accurate.
And it made me want to go away and watch SNL, and also like early SNL. Like, I kind of could have double billed this film with the first episode. I think that would have been a really interesting comparison, when this ended. And it's actually quite a long film, but it completely flew by. I sort of thought, gosh, I'd love to go and see what the actual product was like, because the impression that I get, and hearing interviews with Jason Reitman and such, you get the impression that a huge amount of research and a huge amount of passion for SNL has gone into it. So I'm sure it's very authentic and very accurate. So yeah, I was really delighted with this. I'm going to go and watch it again with my girlfriend because she's really, really keen to see it. And I thought it was a joy.
Now, my esteemed co-host got time to go see Hard Truths this week by Mike Leigh, acclaimed British director, in his new social drama starring a BAFTA-nominated performance by Marion Jean-Baptiste. Now, Reuben, this film looks really, really interesting, really engaging, but really hard-hitting. Really lots of hard truths to talk about, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed.
So would you like to tell us about the movie?
Yes, and actually I'll preface it by saying that I was actually really looking forward to seeing this film with a Q&A with Mike Leigh, which I think would have been absolutely fascinating, but unfortunately TfL let me down and I missed it. So
London
sad
living.
About that, exactly.
London living.
But
yeah.
I have to say, I really, really loved this film. It tells the story of a woman called Pansy, which is Marion Jean-Baptiste's character, who lives in a pretty nice house with her husband and her son. Her sister lives nearby. She's got 2 daughters. And, on the surface, she has a pretty decent life. The problem is that inside, she's in so much pain relating to her childhood and the recent-ish death of her mother. And that manifests itself over the years, turning incredibly, incredibly bitter. This is a woman who completely hates the world and she hates other people, but it's because she herself feels so broken and so unwanted. And so the film, as you say, it is quite hard hitting. The film really explores the depth, really, of her self-loathing and her sense of nihilism. So it's good news then that actually the film is also very, very funny. And that's because amidst her despair, Pansy takes out her fury on people with the pithiest one-liners ever put on celluloid. She has some absolutely fantastic lines in this. There's one very memorable moment, which I mentioned in the introduction, where she's complaining about the fact that she saw someone walking around with a baby in a pram, and the baby was wearing clothes, like a proper outfit with pockets. And she says, "What's a baby got pockets for? What's it going to put in its pockets? Babies don't need pockets." And it's just, that is very much the tone of the film. It's very, very funny, while also being achingly sad. And I do think that the performance by Marianne Jean-Baptiste is absolutely exceptional. She was very rightly nominated for a BAFTA. I wish that she'd got consideration at the Oscars, because she's really quite spellbinding when she's on screen, because she manages to take a really complicated character, feeling so many emotions, and make it heartbreaking and funny and frightening at times. And she's never two-dimensional. Even when she's doing awful things, you just think, gosh, this is wrong. She turns it into something where you go, but actually I understand. I empathize so deeply with you. And I just thought it was wonderful. It's a short film. It's 97 minutes long. And I thought that it was really, really perfectly observed. I mean, Mike Leigh is such a characters director. He famously treats his movies a bit like plays, and does months of rehearsal and finding the characters through kind of working with the cast members. And I think that really shines through, because everyone feels so rounded. Everyone feels so nuanced. And I really, really loved it. It's quite a quiet film in many ways, and I think therefore at times easy to overlook. But it's really, really effective. I definitely recommend that if you have time this week, you catch it.
That's really interesting. The trailers are very engaging. I would love, just from my general knowledge of the film, because I wasn't able to catch it this week, but it seems that it discusses a lot about insular characters, people who isolate themselves, which is very much a problem that we've seen ever since the pandemic.
Right.
And something that hasn't really been discussed much in film, because I think people were so eager to get away from it, to escape. Everything has to be otherworldly. We need 10 more Marlowe films. We need to feel like it never happened. However, this film seems to treat depression in a slightly different way.
Yes.
So how is that sort of represented in the film? Do you feel like it is a post-COVID movie? Or
Yes, that's a really good thing to pick up on. It definitely is a film that exists and has been affected by the pandemic. There is a deep sense of a huge shift that has happened, not just in the characters we meet, but in the kind of the wider community as a whole. And there is a collective suffering, therefore, that I think becomes apparent. Pansy isn't the only person in pain. Everyone, to one extent or another, feeling that. And it explicitly talks about COVID at one point, which I thought was really interesting, because it is so often avoided. And this, I think, by explicitly talking about COVID and explicitly talking about the impact of the pandemic, it makes it feel like it happens in the real world. And that makes the characters so much more vivid. That brings them into our space and us into theirs. It has such authentic life to it. But I think that it's well balanced, therefore, because although it is dealing with really heavy issues, and it is talking about, a post-COVID world, and it is talking about death, and it is talking about depression, and Pansy's son in particular is very clearly a young man who has no sense of direction in his life and is really struggling with his mental health. But the film treats all of these things in a way that's really deeply compassionate. This is a film that really cares about all of its characters. It's not demonizing anybody. And I just thought, honestly, I thought it was really beautiful. This is a story that I think, watching it, on a big screen in a cinema, ironically, it gives you a kind of access that perhaps you wouldn't get from a stage play, because you have the power of the close-up. And sometimes when you see Pansy's face filling the screen, you have such a sense of immediate connection with her. And one of the reasons why that performance is so brilliant is it is an insular character who takes out the fact that she is so insular by being extroverted, if you know what I mean. It's a very, very clever performance, because it's all internal, but it's also all external, but they're kind of different characters. So it's really, really good. It's really impressive. I really think it's going to be central in Mike Leigh's catalogue, when we're sort of looking back at his oeuvre as a whole. And yeah, I really would recommend you catch it sometime this week. And next up, we discuss Companion, the new sci-fi tinged comedy thriller from director Drew Hancock in his feature film debut. Now, Jake, I'm very, very intrigued about this film. I've seen multiple trailers and it certainly looks right up my street. But what did you make of it when you went to watch it earlier this week?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the trailers, because I think the trailers have done as trailers often do and spoiled the whole film. Well, spoils the twist in the film, and because it's been spoiled, I will talk about it. The fact that Sophie Thatcher's character is a robot. She is a robot for a companion, a girlfriend.
Hence the name.
A girlfriend for rent, a girlfriend to boot up and control however you mean. And that's shown in the trailer, sadly, which is such a shame because they build it up like she could be a real person, then snap.
Wow.
But the trailer doesn't give away everything. There's still twists and turns the way this goes. And it's hard to describe this film. It's sci-fi, but only a few years down the line. It's got thriller, but it's also quite horrific in moments. But it's also very funny.
Yeah.
I loved this film. Like what we said about Saturday Night, it was a bit of a roller coaster. I don't think there was a foot put wrong in this film. It was right up my street. The comedy was great. The twists that haven't been overly revealed were really enjoyable. And, it's got a stellar cast. I think that's what this week really shows, is that the ensemble really works. Sophie Thatcher, I saw her first. The first thing I saw her in was Heretic last year.
Yeah,
a film
me too.
I really enjoyed. I thought she was a brilliant, brilliant performance in it. She's amazing in this film. Like, she captures both this perfect, adoring, head over heels, beautiful sort of petite character, but then she also embodies this powerful, threatening, Terminator-esque robot.
Wow.
But once the character sort of develops through the journey, it's not as bland as the Terminator. It deals with great sci-fi themes. It deals with the idea of what is artificial intelligence, what is human domination over something that has artificial intelligence, or intelligence in general, and it also deals with this idea of domestic control. Jack Quaid is great in it. I know he's a Nepo baby. I know his parents are very, very famous people, but he just shines to me as someone who's got this great charisma, great to watch on screen. I think every part, I love Guillermo from What We Do in the Shadows.
I know, me too. I love that series.
He's very funny in this, but also has very, very touching moments. And that's something that shocked me, is how it really did deal with the human element of these characters.
Yeah.
Because it is about control, but there is also this aspect of love that runs through themes of it. The character, the robot, the main point is to love.
Okay.
And it's really interesting to see how people actually react to that when something is so earnest in its love, even though it's a program.
Yeah.
How they react with it. And I loved it. I thought the gore really worked for me. I thought there's great iconography. I think you've seen it in the trailer. She sets her hand on fire.
Yeah.
She's covered in blood. It's got this sort of Carrie-esque look. But I think, I hope at Halloween people, have that costume, because it's just it looks brilliant. I loved it. I thought everyone should go see it because it's fun. It is fun, but it does have those moral questions that you want from a good sci-fi, that I think is so lost in the dregs of constant Star Wars or constant Star Trek, that have lost their general moral principles, that are just making it for content. And I think, yes, cheaper, shorter, neater films that really have a point of, and we've had these ideas before. Ex Machina is a great idea. I love Ex Machina. I'm not going to say a bad word about Ex Machina. Who can? That'd be a ridiculous thing to do. It's almost a perfect movie. Beautiful, brilliantly performed, but far more sinister, far more brutal. But this film also deals with it, but with sprinklings of comedy, sprinklings of, I said, a bit of Columbo, a bit of that, villains trying to get away with,
I see,
with dastardly plans and stuff like that, which I love. It's just really engaging. I sat and it was really packed cinema. I was so surprised.
Really?
That usually quite a lot of the films I see, quite sadly, it's just me on my lonesome with two
Yeah.
other people and someone snoring in the back.
And do you think that this is a film then that will appeal sort of across the board then? Like, because I sort of had the impression that it was a horror film, but from what you're saying, it's less sort of genre specific than that, and it's sort of broaching a number of different filmic archetypes.
Well, I have this major issue with the distinction between thriller and horror anyway, because a lot of thrillers are using a lot of quite garish, grotesque moments, or sort of hard-hitting. What would have been seen in a horror 20 years ago is now casually in every thriller you ever see.
Yes.
So I actually don't think it is a horror, and it has been portrayed as far more mysterious than it is. The twist that is revealed in the trailer, that Sophie Thatcher plays a robot, is revealed 20 minutes in. So it is a central theme that we follow. It's not something that, oh, I'm surprised. The horror elements are offset by the sort of more beautiful elements and sort of the funnier elements, and just the great performances. I think if you want to see young and up-and-coming actors be fun and interesting and malevolent and give great performances, Sophie Thatcher, I think she's on my rising star. She's going to be the biggest thing ever, I hope.
Is she a new Scream Queen, do you think? Because I feel like with this and Heretic, it kind of feels like she could move in that direction if she fancies.
I think Scream Queen is, I mean, obviously it's been adopted as this great thing, you've got the amazing Scream Queens of the past, Janet Leigh and her daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis. But then now it's the new trend of that Scream Queens are actually the central kick-ass characters.
Oh, yes. 100%.
And I adore that, because I want Sophie Thatcher to be that. Because if her niche is bizarre little horror oddities on these very nicely contained, because I loved Heretic. I thought,
I really liked it too. And
I think she's wonderful. And I know Jack Quaid's been rising ever since The Boys, I think.
Of course.
And I don't care he's a nipple baby. I don't care about any of that nonsense. I want to see him in everything. Great film. Highly recommend. Probably don't take your grandma. My mother probably wouldn't like it. If we bring back what would my mum like a film? But I think you'll have a great time with your friends with it, but also come out actually talking about the sci-fi morals and the sci-fi conundrum that this film is about. So highly recommended from me. If you can catch it, Reuben, go see it. It's amazing. And finally this week, we talk about the 25th anniversary of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, directed by Ang Lee, starring Michelle Yeoh and Chow Yun-fat. Now, we're obviously looking over a film again, like we did with Seven, and there's so much that could be said about the actual film you could see. Michelle Yeoh is always amazing.
I love her.
Always amazing. Is brilliant in this film. There's a very strong female presence in this film.
Definitely.
Just amazing forefront of action. The choreography is second to none. I think Quentin Tarantino owes a lot to his theft of all these films, his choreography style. But let's have a talk about something a little more interesting, which is the legacy of the film and what is inspired, where these actors and stories have gone, and what we've seen in the Western world, how it's impacted our sort of filmmaking culture on this side of the pond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right place to start, because this is sort of the very high-profile wuxia film that broke through into the mainstream, if you like, in Europe and in America. It's a really interesting example, I think, of how Ang Lee was able to, and I think he does this with several of his films, kind of blend genres with a kind of very commercial sensibility. So, I think this is a really interesting kind of landmark film, really, and you can see that also in the way that, as you mentioned in your introduction, this has influenced countless films. I think the one that is most explicit to me are the Matrix sequels, which have so much sort of wuxia-inspired choreography, and actually a lot of the dramatic and tragic themes it explores as well. And then, of course, Kill Bill. Massively, obviously indebted to Ang Lee's work on this film. But I mean, it's so interesting 25 years on. I mean, do we still see that impact? I think Shang-Chi is probably the most recent film where you can see a really clear reference, that obviously sharing, the cast member of Michelle Yeoh.
Yes, I feel like another major example that I bring up, which was another Oscars darling, was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
For sure.
Which deals with, again, starring Michelle Yeoh, who seems to be in every franchise everywhere. But again, that's a really interesting film to look at from a Western perspective, because it was distributed by A24 and produced, and there are predominantly English-speaking characters. Of course, it traverses language very beautifully. What a brilliant film.
Yeah.
But, it's sort of bringing that back after sort of, I think, a bit of a slump. I think action took a direction from Crouching Tiger. There's a film I mentioned before we started rolling, which is a film called Hero, which also deals with this amazing, beautiful film. Extreme melodramatic action, not over the top melodramatic. It requires these great poetic movements. It requires, bouncing from surface to surface with the ease of abusing gravity.
Yes.
It has no effect. It's superhero before superhero really took off. I think you do actually see it a lot. And I think you had an overexposure to this excessive, but used in a very negative way because it wasn't appropriate for it. I remember seeing in Daredevil, the Ben Affleck Daredevil, quite specifically, they took a lot of inspiration from this film, but completely very terrible use of it. Like the character of Elektra, they have a fight on a park bench. It doesn't work for this sort of vibe. And so I think people actually, some of the legacy of this film is people's knee-jerk reaction to it.
Yeah.
So then we actually get a much different sort of action choreography later. Daredevil as a character and as a franchise is another good example of this phenomenon itself. The Ben Affleck Daredevil film has too much of that. Of course, there are ninja aspects of the character of Daredevil, but it goes too far. It doesn't fit into the world. It doesn't fit a Western audience's standard for what they thought about superhero films. But then you get the Netflix TV series, which uses very brutal, very realistic, close-knit, long-take action, which isn't glamorous, which isn't supported by all these flips and tricks and twists. And is, of course, most notable in the John Wick franchise as well. But I think John Wick is a nicer example because it's trying to blend the two.
Yes.
It's trying to find a line between it. But I feel like we've lost a trick because there is such, and I say the word balletic, like there's a ballet quality to this. Choreography can be beautiful.
Yes.
And also effectively devastating.
Yeah.
There are great moments in this where you're on the knee-jerk reaction. There's a moment where one of the villain characters throws back a sai at someone and it hits them in the face, and I went, "Oh damn!" And I would never do that with films. I know how these things are made, so I'm like, it's just it was a whip pan and it was already in him, but I was like, "Oh god!" That I felt the reaction of it. And I thought, wow, what effective choreography. I sort of find it's a bit of a shame that we've lost a bit more of that push to the extreme. I think it got so popular that it became parody. I think a lot of Quentin Tarantino stuff borders on the line of parody. A film we've also talked about, Team America World Police, parodies.
It does.
These sort of kung fu fighting nature. I know it's not specifically kung fu, but that's what the Western world adopted it as. I think we need to get back to this level of beauty with it. But I think Everything Everywhere All at Once was a good stepping stone to be more interesting in your choreography.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the superhero comparison is also very interesting because obviously Ang Lee then goes on and makes the very maligned Hulk film. I mean, the action in that is very different. But, you have a similar kind of sense of spectacle created by, everyone just being on wires all the time and being flung across the screen. And, that there is I would say, a kind of comic book indulgence in the action in that film that comes, I think, from a familiarity with wuxia style action. And I also think, actually tonally, the myth of wuxia stories, right, which are very much a kind of genre and tend to center on people who are, they're a little bit like, Robin Hood or William Tell that we were discussing a couple of weeks ago. They tend to be these stories about ordinary people, not kings or princes or whatever, or ordinary people who sort of go on this extraordinary journey and fight for what's good and right. And that's every single superhero story ever. So there is a kind of interesting shared DNA. And I'm sort of shocked that we haven't seen more superhero movies from Ang Lee, therefore. It feels like, it was sort of in his bones, in his veins. He did Hulk, and I mean,
people
I don't
so
remember
turned off.
exactly.
They ran away, I think, from
I
Ang Lee.
don't remember that film coming out because I was far too young. But I think there's kind of a little bit of a reappreciation for it happening. I think, in the sort of the post MCU era that we're now in, people are sort of reevaluating that film. I wonder if we could see like a really crazy whoosher-style superhero movie from him at some point, because I'd be really up for that.
I feel like that is a trick that, again, like I say, a lot of the missed opportunity of the legacy of this film is that superhero films have become a bland, repeated product.
Yes.
And the action of many films with their major action scenes becomes a flurry of special effects. And it disappears into the pixelated world of underpaid, poor visual effects artists.
Yes.
And so I do think, as I said before, it would be interesting to see a creator like Ang Lee, again, attempting something in this post-MCU world where we have had too much of one thing, and now it's time to sort of try something else. Because Ang Lee's films are all incredibly different. He has done such a vast approach. But I think the legacy of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon that isn't seen, I specifically have talked a lot about choreography, but obviously Ang Lee goes on to direct Brokeback Mountain.
Absolutely.
And Life of Pi.
Yeah. And
then you have to look at the moments in this film, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that deal with a repressed love and and legacy and expectation.
Yes.
A lot of these examples that crop up in his films, quite a lot of just people, the human need, the human want to be something different or have something different, but you can't quite break through it. Central two main characters are a repressed love for one another. And, you see these things sing, and that's why Brokeback Mountain is so effective.
Yeah.
Because you have the maturity of that director who can do the best action you've ever seen.
Absolutely.
But can also take that moment to look at those very nuanced and have great direction. Because, to be honest, the characters in this are not filled with backstory. They're not filled with, you might even say they're not that deep characters, because they have very standard roles that you might see in 100 martial arts films. However, when those moments come, you can see in the performances of the actors and just how they take it, that the direction was so precise.
Yes.
They knew exactly what they wanted. And I think that's a trait that follows through in his movies. And again, what maybe we're missing in these action epics is just actually having the nuance of both.
Yeah.
Choreography can be beautiful, and you can partner that with beautiful emotion.
No, I think that's so right. And interestingly, when you look at something like Everything Ever All at Once, I think that does a really perfect, combining of emotion, of action. And, that's a film which sort of has free license because of the kind of multiverse concept of it, to indulge in stuff that is not realistic, shall we say, And I think that we sort of exist in an age where, and, I suppose the zenith of this is something like The Batman, which is so gritty and so realistic. I think we live in an age where we're very scared of things that are a little bit divorced from reality. If we look at something like, we were talking about Robin Hood in relation to William Tell last week, and the Taron Robin Hood film, which is very gritty and is a kind of, as far away from a sort of, not necessarily swords and tights.
Bows and feathers, sort of like tights.
We're terrified of Rob
films.
We're terrified of stuff that is not really gritty at the moment. I think there's a perception that people won't take it seriously or it won't sell. But I'd love to go back to a slightly more kind of poetic, just slightly more whimsical form of storytelling, especially when it comes to those action genres, because it's ballet at the end of the day. When you watch Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's dance. The combat is beautiful, and it ties in so fantastically with the characters and their journey. And you could almost watch it on silent because the action does the telling of the story for you.
Absolutely. And I think you make an excellent point that, and I think I can agree with you with Ang Lee's Hulk and just sort of the approach to action films, because that's all superhero movies are, with this mythos.
Yeah.
Because this is like a fairy tale, like a story, like someone telling a story. And again, the film I mentioned before, Hero, is the same thing. It's like a story passed on, and you really get that sense of it. And we've lost that in our big mythos films. I think they are too concerned with being gritty. And I think, the great example is that the James Gunn sort of Suicide Squad, the James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy films, which don't take themselves as seriously, do much better.
Fantastic.
And then that's why I'm very much looking forward to his Superman, because I'm like, finally, you've put some color back into Superman. Because this is just like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, someone on wires pretending to fly. Yeah. But you can do it in such an interesting way. And I think the legacy of it is a bit skewed. And I think people need to rewatch these films and understand really what made them work is just maturity with these things, but also a bit of fun. I think these characters, the way the movement is, as you said, it flows like water. It's not brutal, it's beautiful. And I think let's see more action films like that. Let's see how we can do that in this new landscape of post MCU, post John Wick.
And now, of course, it's time for us to talk about our films of the week. Jake, what was your pick of this week's roster?
Well, of course, I have not had the time to see Hard Truths yet. I will catch it because of your very thorough and exciting always review. I'd love to check it out. I'd love to see those sort of stories. But I must say, and you should check this film out, Companion willed me out of, like, I had a slump after a long day and I was like, oh, I'll go to the cinema. But it wowed me. It really did. It was a film I didn't know I had to see, because it was just everything I was looking for in a film. It had elements of horror, it had humor, it had intensity, it had great performances. And I think even if the trailers give a bit too much away, I was just fully enveloped by it. So I loved it. Sophie Thatcher will be the next big star ever. Jack Quaid's already on his way. I love them both in this, and I want to see him in everything else. So yeah, that's absolutely my pick of the week. What about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love Mike Leigh. I think Hard Truths is a really great film, but I actually am going to go with Saturday Night because I think it's such a crowd pleaser. You know, I think people will go and watch this and they'll just have a fantastic time. It's funny, it's exciting, it's got these fantastic, unbelievably famous faces playing unbelievably famous faces, and to cap it off, it's got an amazing soundtrack. So honestly, I think it's the perfect thing to go and watch this Saturday night. Yeah, it's fabulous. I really recommend it.
And thank you so much for joining us again on Cinema Spotlight.
It's been so lovely having you, and so lovely to be chatting to you again, Jake.
Lovely to be face-to-face once again. Next week, we'll be talking about September 5th, Love Hurts, Dogman, and The Seed of the Sacred Fig. So you better be here to check that out.
It's going to be a fantastic episode, I can tell you now, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Bye-bye.